What up, bro? I can hear you.
Welcome everybody to tonight's live stream. As you guys know, it is me and David Patrick Harry tonight, and we're gonna have a good time. We are gonna cover. We're both diving into this furious issue. I mean, the internet has just blown up the last year with the topic of red pill, manosphere, feminism, dark triad, right? Game, pickup artist, top G, Rollo, Pearl, you name it. This is the whole internet talking about it. And he's covered it. I've covered it. And I imagine we're both going to be covering it pretty heavily in the near future because it's so hot of a topic. And hopefully we can arrange maybe some debates and discussions. I think you're trying to get something going with Rollo. And I do want to give a shout out to Rollo because tonight I'm going to be covering with my buddy David here the paper that he did a live stream about. It's called Signaling Virtuous Victimhood as Indicators of Dark Triad Personality. So if you guys know about the red pill or the history of pickup artists, that niche, then you know about the dark triad. You know about this characteristic, which is the triad is Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. So we're not going to spend the whole night on that and how that relates to what they call virtuous victimhood and virtue signaling through victim status and why that's an advantage. We're going to get into all that in a minute. We're also going to be talking about David's live streams that he's done on the phenomena of red pill and the different characters and the pros and the cons. And so where do you want to kick it off tonight? Because you've done a stream, I've done a stream, and I know we're going to be doing more streams on this. What's on your mind first?
I guess to get into it is for those who aren't aware, kind of what the manosphere and the red pill is. Because a lot of it, and I think that's the misnomer, is I do want to debate and get into this sphere and debate people, but we probably agree with a lot of what they talk about. And so a lot of the ills of the world right now, men being disenfranchised, what's called the lost boy generation, looking for role models, trying to find status and a place to find themselves really in the world, we can all agree with. We can agree that, Rollo talks about a gynocentric worldview, basically that the world is being oriented around women. Don't disagree with that really either. I would say our critiques as traditional Christian men is going to come to why would somebody become high value? What's the point of being high value? What's the point of getting these virgin, pure women? What's the point of a man in society? And I think that's where the red pill and the manosphere kind of is too myopic. And it kind of deals with really important issues for men right now. But you'll hear anybody who's been really into Rollo stuff, they'll say, oh, red pill's a praxeology, it's not an ideology. And of course, they have no philosophical understanding that, red pill is not engineering and mathematics. It's definitely an ideology. It's built within presuppositions of how men should be or how society should be and how the society is. So manosphere is really blown up, as even Rollo's talked about. The manosphere that really got going with the game and in the whole late 2000s, early 2010s. It's very different now in the 20s. Post 2020, it's a whole new thing. And obviously the Tates, Neil Strauss. I got that book actually too.
I got my game Bible right here. You got your Bible? Look, I'm gonna be a Bible thumper. I'm a Bible thumper, but it's the game Bible. No, I'm just joking. Yeah, I've got a lot of those books over here too, just sitting around. And I read Rollo for many years, and I read Return of Kings. I read Rush's site for many years. So I know this domain. I know the thought process, and it's I think I totally agree with what you're kind of laying out at the beginning. Is there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that they have.
Yeah.
And when we get really precise, I'll even go so far as to agree with Rollo's point against like Jordan Peterson, because I was listening to a really long stream that he did, and he was critiquing Jordan Peterson, not on everything, but just on certain areas, like when Jordan Peterson continues with that sort of, it's really an annoying tradcon position that it's time to man up, bucko, man up. And it's like, well, now wait a minute. As a classical liberal, what's the motivations for me as a young man? Why am I supposed to man up? Right. And I thought Rollo has a really good critique of that. Maybe we can talk about that later. That's getting really precise. But yeah. So like, tell us more about like when you encountered manosphere and what did you think it was? Because it used to be, first Red Pill was like conspiracy stuff. Then Red Pill became men's issues, and it sort of just morphed into a lot of different things.
Well, I think, and that's what, you hear Red Pill back in 2016 with Trump, and it had to do with, almost libertarian understandings of the Fed Reserve and the New World Order, and that there's a larger agenda. In 2020, being based in Red Pill were synonymous. And it seems like Red Pill, because of the explosion of the manosphere, it's basically been totally oriented around male-female relationships at this point. And so the Red Pill then is trying to fix the sexual dynamics between men and women in the 21st century. And you look at somebody like Kevin Samuels, who's now passed away. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was an African-American man down in Atlanta who he blew up on the scene. I remember I watched a few videos. This was like early to 2020. He was in the low thousands, maybe 20,000 subs or something like that. And then within just a few months, he was over 1 million subs, and he would start to have women on, and he would ask them questions about, oh, what do you want? What's your dress size? How tall are you? How much do you weigh? What does your face look like when you get out of the shower? And then he would just give them a reality check. He's like, lady, you're 5'5" and you weigh 200 pounds. You're not going to get a man who makes six figures. And this blew up on the internet because he was given like this dose of reality to women. I would say Rollo is still probably the preeminent manosphere Red Pill promoter. I would say he's probably the most articulate. He's probably got the best arguments. But now there's all these quacks and these young guys on Twitter. You see them, they're like showing their Lambo and the Bugatti, or I mean, not the Tates specifically, but other guys. And they're like, oh, yeah, I got this girl last night. She had a fiance, and yeah, I fucked her right in the club, man. High value. And it's like, dude, what? Like this is supposed to be the manosphere now. It's just like these men that are totally hedonistic, and it's just like now about a numbers notch and getting many as women as you can. And it's like, well, what is the role of masculinity? What's the role of men? Is that why people should brag? And I've seen this before, bragging about how many virgins they sleep with. And it's like, as a religious man, I don't disagree with their even assessment on what a high value woman is: submissive, feminine, fit, pretty, pure. Don't disagree with all that stuff. But then why are you also sleeping with girls that are virgins, and then you're criticizing girls for being OnlyFans and having high body counts? That seems contradictory. If you're not going to marry them, why are you sleeping with virgin girls? And so it's like the manosphere, at least to some degree, I'm not saying that Rollo says this, but generally speaking, as a cultural phenomenon, it's bridged into the Whatever podcast, Pearly Things, who our friend Rachel Wilson has been on, really talking about feminism. And so it's weird. It's like this, it's a new space to talk about sexual dynamics that I think people haven't been able to express. And that's why it's just exploding like wildfire on social media.
Yeah. But even before all that, I remember the first phase or cycle of this was, I mean, there was a phase of dudes that were doing the PUA, Frank T.J. Mackey stuff in the 2000s, but like Mystery and Rollo was first kind of blogging back when Mystery got popular. And then when Rusha Return of Kings and, his stuff, that was really kicking off like 2011, 12, 13, 14 is when that was starting to get some traction. And I forget what year the game actually came out, but there was an important element to this which also came about, which was men's rights. So men's rights came about because a lot of the legal system was seen to be extremely disadvantageous to men and bent against any of the arguments of the men or the fathers in those situations.
Right.
Always just, well, women are always right, which became like some stupid hashtag, right? Which is complete nonsense. And
Right.
I mean, just crazy stuff. And so there's the men's rights element of it that was kind
Right.
of its own thing. And there was the spearhead, and there was a guy, I cannot remember the name of there was a professor, Dr. somebody, and he ran the Spearhead website. And I used to listen to all these podcasts. I read all this stuff. And then Red Pill it was like overlapping with men's rights and then and the social dynamic stuff and conspiracy stuff. Because originally, as I know you know, but for those that don't know in the audience, the Red Pill is from the Matrix. I mean, yeah, it goes back to Total Recall, but the popularization of it is the Matrix, where Neo has a choice between is he going to wake up to how the world really works, or is he going to stay in the system and take the blue pill? So it had to do, like you said back then, in the 2000s, with Federal Reserve and the stuff that Alex was talking about and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of been an amorphous, elastic thing that's been able to be pasted on a bunch of different things. But it is really surprising to me that it kind of made its way back in the last couple of years. But I did watch an interesting Rollo video where he makes the argument that actually the red pill thing actually goes in a cycle. And so there was a cycle of it before, 2016, back in 2012, 13, when, Russian Return of Kings is really popular. And then there's going to be another cycle of all of this. He says that after the election, you'll notice a lot of these people who will gain a lot of influence and traction. He's like, after the election, the next election, they'll die away and they'll disavow it. And he made a good point that Candace Owen, I forgot this. I actually remember this because she used to go on Ralph back in the day. And at that time, she was Red Pill Black. That was her handle on Twitter. So she was doing with red pill issues, and then she transitioned into being basically just a political commentator, right?
Right.
Not that I care. I don't care whether she talks about politics or whatever. I'm not knocking her. I'm just saying that this was the trek she took. And so a lot, and Rollo's making a good point, which I think is true, is that he's saying that if you watch a lot of these red pill people, they're going to disavow red pill after the election because they're riding a wave to get popular, and then they'll transition into being political normie conservative commentators because this cycle has happened in the past. And I think that's really important to notice because, and I'm not calling anybody specifically out. I don't really care what I don't know people's motives, and I'm not interested in judging people's motives. But what I do know is that this is a recurring pattern that a lot of these red pill people right now will transition into just being normie political commentators after the next election. And so you can tell there is going to be there's a grift phase that goes on, is what I'm trying to say.
That's what I was going to say. A lot of grifters in this sphere. And that's why I want to get into, and you too, I'm sure, is just to kind of debate some of these guys, because it's kind of built on sand, their houses. Now, again, a handful of people like Rollo have been there from the beginning and have gone through all these different various phases. Like you said, it was conspiratorial, it moved into men's issues, and the manosphere as a title is actually a derogatory term created by feminists to describe all these men talking about, as you said, men's rights and men's issues. And this has just blossomed and grown, and especially in the last 3 to 4 years, where it's, I mean, as we were talking about in Nashville, I mean, this is like the hottest topic on YouTube now. You can't scroll YouTube without your YouTube shorts or YouTube clips from what all these different podcasts, whether it be Pearly Things or Fresh and Fit or Rollo or the whatever podcast, it's in your face. It's everywhere. So this is clearly one of the hottest topics and something that people want to talk about. It's because people can't have good relationships right now, and we can get into it. And I think that's going to be partly tied to secularism and the way that culture is. And I would argue, and if I was to debate somebody, I would make this debate, because I was supposed to debate Spencer Cornelia tomorrow night on The Crucible. He's got a big YouTube channel that exposes like fakes and frauds and stuff on marriage. He says men shouldn't get married. And I was basically going to grant him all his premises and say, yeah, if you're secular, probably not a good idea, because how are you going to go about finding a woman that you can actually trust? And what's the point of the relationship? That's the other thing, is like, for us as Orthodox Christians, you get married to have a family. You get married to commit not just a legal, but a spiritual union with somebody, a vow that you're going to be with him for eternity. That's totally on a different level than the manosphere and the red pill is talking about relationships. So he backed out of it, but we were supposed to do a debate tomorrow night that I don't know if I'll be doing with anybody or not. But I grant them that, like you said, the court systems, divorce courts, child custody, all this stuff, it's all oriented against men. The bigger question then is why? And this is where I would have a beef with Rollo. Somebody pointed out, because he had that viral tweet that said, don't get married, don't have children, and get a vasectomy is the quickest way to become a high value man. And that implies, even though Destiny and Sneeko try to push him on, well, what is a high value man? He was kind of reluctant to define and said, well, everything's contextual, meaning relative. That I would say, no, there are objective things that we can qualify what a high value man is, and we can get into those here in a few. But
now, a quick question. So the guy that I'm not familiar with the person that you're talking about that you were going to have the debate with. Now, is he MGTOW? Because MGTOW kind of is its own thing, right? Which is like, so out of the men's, the pot of the manosphere, there sort of eventually became these schisms and divisions to where there's the sort of the men's, there's men's rights. There's the guys who are, pickup artists, social dynamics. Here's how to make you into a high value male guys. And then there was the division of what would become MGTOW/incel guys who had decided that, no, I want SEX bots. I want, literally, right? Like, because some of those popular channels from a few years ago, I don't know if they still exist, like Poop Flinging Monkey and Barbarossa or whatever. Like, they became full on like, it's actually bad to get married, period. Having any sex relations is actually bad. We should have sex bots, literally. So that's the course that some of those people took in terms of incel. So is this a guy who's which camp is the guy you're talking about?
No, I think he has a prominent YouTube channel, it's like 400,000 or something, and he basically exposes like fakes and frauds, tax cheats, hustlers on the internet, people selling fake courses, stuff like that. That's how he grew his channel. But more recently, he's kind of developed a friendship with a handful of people in the manosphere. So he's been on like Fresh and Fit and like Access Vegas with Rollo and people. So he's kind of dipping his toes in there. But I don't know his personal story. I believe, I haven't watched all his stuff, that he has gone through a divorce. And so he looks like he's in maybe his mid 30s or maybe later 30s. I'm not. So he still got a lot of life ahead of him. But I would probably grant him many of his premises. So I don't think he's MGTOW per se. And that is, like you said, there's like the red pill, the blue pill, which is a derogatory term, the red pill, which means, you're awake to the matrix. And then you have the black pill. And that's becoming more and more popular with the nihilism, the far right wing. This usually gets into almost racial stuff, the black pill, because there's nothing for them to hang on to anymore. And then you have the men going their own way, the MGTOW. I don't think Spencer was part of one of those groups. However, he echoes a sentiment that we find, common throughout the manosphere, whether it be Coach Greg Adams or various people telling men, oh, don't get married, don't get married, don't get married. Just have a girlfriend or spin plates, have multiple girlfriends. And again, the point I would ask is, well, what's the point of sexual relationships? What's the point of getting married in the first place? And it's going to get to family creation, and then it's going to get to what's best for children, and all these other things that I think that they just don't focus on per se, because that's not, it's more about male, female sexual dynamics and why it's all falling apart. And it's a fact, it is falling apart. I mean, you luckily haven't been single recently, but glory to God, I have my fiance and we'll be getting married soon. But dude, it's terrible out there with the OnlyFans. And this is where, again, I grant the manosphere and the red pill. Look at these girls. Look at the young girls at our dating age from 18 to 35 or 40. It's terrible. Narcissism, self-absorption, social media.
People overlook that a lot of the girls too are on pills and SSRIs, which is a big issue too,
and birth control, which totally
all the pharmaceutical cocktail.
Yeah. And there's multiple studies that shown that birth control makes women basically choose more effeminate men. And then I think even Candace Owens did a whole thing on this about how she's against birth control and talking about all these rates of divorce where women, they'll be on birth control, they'll get married to this guy, then they have to get off birth control to have a baby. They have a baby, and then they look at this guy and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm like not attracted to you. You're not going to be the provider or the protector of me and the child. And then they feel totally unhappy with the relationship and they get a divorce. And it's true, 75 to 80% of all racial demographics, women initiate divorce. So again, granting the manosphere and the red pill, like what's the upside of getting married? Well, it depends on where you're coming from and what is the point of these relationships. And yeah, so we can begin to define. I have a handful of things defining again at a precept level, like what is the red pill? And the red pill is
Well,
tied to
hold on. Before you get into that, I have a
yeah,
question for
yeah, yeah.
you. I have a question for you about some of the previous discussions that you've made that I think is actually really relevant for what we're talking about tonight, because I didn't even realize it until like a day or two ago that the stream that we planned on doing before got postponed. I was feeling like crap. I had like a bug. And it ended up being that we're doing it tonight on Father's Day in America, which is hilarious because, I mean, this is right, the patriarchy day. So, you know, the feminism succeeded through a lot of things, through a lot of money and a lot of support from very wealthy families, oligarchs, foundations, think tanks, and so forth. And just the sort of inherent virus nature of leftism and all that, that it was able to sort of worm its way into all of our institutions. And one of the ideas behind it, which we'll get into, I'm sure, in a little bit, is not just the idea of a society organized around so-called fairness and egalitarianism, but also this idea that there are no boundaries. And the patriarchy is bad because somehow phallologocentrism it creates boundaries, and that's bad because boundaries limit you, man. You be whatever you want. I can identify as an attack helicopter if I want to, man. Right? So literally, I could be anything one day, identify as something else the next day. And that's the root of this idea that there are no limits or boundaries to reality. There's no metaphysical essences of things. Things don't have natures. Right. We can determine whatever they are from our own postmodern magical thinking perspective. So tell us why boundaries are actually good and why they're absolutely necessary to function at all. And how that's connected to patriarchy, to men.
Right. So again, what if you get into like what is the role of masculinity? And as you pointed out, Jacques Derrida in his famous book Grammatology says, well, it's this thing that's the central pillar of Christianity. It's what he called phallogocentrism, privileging the phallus masculine principle, logocentrism, looking at a logos oriented worldview and focusing on the center, the middle. And he said, what we got to do to undermine this is focus on marginalization. And we have to take the marginal and make that the center, take the center and move that to the fringes. And anybody who's watched commercials nowadays would probably see that's exactly what's going on. And this is how he believed it would undermine the patriarchy, because he thought, again, the patriarchy upholded boundaries and moral structures, and we needed to erode those. And so when we look at our society, the boundary between men and women dissolved. The boundary of nation states dissolved. The boundary between man and machine dissolved. The boundary between man and animal dissolved. That we see what I would argue is a henosis, is a Neoplatonic term for really a different understanding of what we would consider theosis. It's like this dissolution of all boundaries, so everything becomes unified, and this is supposed to be the end point of the mystical process. And I would say, no, this is like a satanic henosis.
Everything is one, dude. Oh, everything is one, dude. I just did biggest hit ever. Oh. And I saw everything as one, which, oh, wow, you came to the realization of what every ancient pagan religion ever said. Everything's one. Yeah, right. It's really deep, dude. But this actually has consequences, like you're saying, right? The working out of this leads to social destruction. And a lot of people don't realize that this stuff can be weaponized and can be used to break down societies. Of course, we talked with our friend Rachel, you know, in her book, she talks about the occult roots of feminism and witchcraft, how a lot of women's liberation comes out of witchcraft. And, you know, you couldn't have the crazy, insane, postmodern denial of all essences and boundaries that we have today without having feminism first. So feminism prepares the way for the destroying of all boundaries by first destroying that notion of the boundary between legitimate roles for men and women.
Right. Which, rightfully so, that both Rachel and Andrew Wilson point out, is that it has to do with men. Feminism only existed because men granted the right. So this process, and that's where I point that it has to do with men allowing the boundary to dissolve. You can still point to the Islamic world, and this is not an apologetics for Islam, but it still maintains its patriarchy, and the men are still then in control of that society. So the Western man has slowly given away the boundaries. And something I've spoke with even Father Peter Hears is that I equate this with the fall. Adam simping for Eve, Adam turning his back on God, the true patriarchy, that true maintaining of the boundaries, whether it be King Ahab and Jezebel. Men simping and choosing like sexual pleasure and the sexuality of women over its relationship with God, over these higher callings, these transcendental values. This is what allows us to begin to dissolve these boundaries at a societal level. How did everybody choose this? And so the boundaries are essential. And so men always maintain boundaries. That's what war is about. That's what defending your home is about. That's what value structure is about. And so shout out to all the fathers out there for Father's Day. And that was one of the things that I would level at the manosphere and the red pill people is like, what patriarchy are you a part of? You see, we're Orthodox Christian. We're part of basically the last patriarchy in Christendom, the true patriarchy going, you could argue, all the way back to Abraham. What patriarchy are you a part of? Because they want to criticize feminism or some of the moral indecency of contemporary women. But it's like, bro, I'm part of an institution that goes back ages. This is our worldview. You're doing this as an isolated, atomized person. Like, it's totally less effective, and you're not part of any actual patriarchal tradition.
One of the elite texts that I was just reading, I'm trying to remember which one it was actually discussing that present-day Islam has not yet completely capitulated to the Western geopolitical strategy of pushing feminism. I'm trying to remember which text it was. Now, that's not a concession to, oh, therefore Islam is based in Triad, bro, because actually the document it just said that we haven't got to them fully yet. We'll eventually get to them. And the irony is that, of course, when a lot of Islamic people who end up in the U.S. or in the West, they actually, just like all the other immigrants in a generation or two, turn into totally Americanized individuals as well. So the document wasn't conceding that Islam is trad and based. It's just saying that we haven't gotten them fully on board with what we're pushing for the whole world yet, but we will.
Right. And they believe that they will. And the Islam, and that's one of the things that I would argue that it's probably, and this, I mentioned this at Montanica to Bishop Maxime, that I said, you know, really the greatest threats to orthodoxy, it's not atheists. Anybody still thinking that atheists are going to like convert and apostatize the Orthodox, like you're out of touch. The biggest threat to people in Orthodoxy is people that believe in the occult. And I think Islam's going to grow because Islam is going to be this place, especially for these manosphere type young men. Well, you know, I'm disenfranchised in the West. I have no social status, but
if I become a Muslim like Sneeko and, I'll get my virgin bride. Exactly.
Yeah, they'll get their virgin bride. They don't have to do anything. They just have to submit to Islam. And it's like, bro, that's not masculine either. That's just another form of consumerism. That's just a coomer. It's like, bro, the point is, and I agree with the manosphere, you got to work on yourself. But this is where theology and actually taking philosophy serious, I think this is part of masculinity as well in regards to spiritually leading somebody. So again, we can get into anywhere you want to go at this point, but I think,
one last point on Islam which is that a lot of the recent manosphere individuals, obviously largely because of the Tate acceptance of, and I don't know exactly if Tristan has fully accepted Islam.
No, I saw recently with did you see the Patrick Bet David?
I have not.
Tristan still says he's Orthodox Christian.
Okay, so he hasn't fully accepted.
And Andrew, as a Muslim, has actually pulled back on some of his stuff. So it's no longer get the Ferrari to escape the Matrix. He's saying, okay, you got to do. He slowly in that interview again I was listening to. He's kind of changed his tone on a little bit of issues that I would argue are a little bit more closer to our side of things as a traditional religious person. So again, I don't know the sincerity of his heart. I'm not here to talk about their faith or Orthodoxy or Islam, but just about what they say and how that ripple effects in culture.
Well, one thing that somebody had a good critique of, it might have been you. I can't remember who was critiquing the reasoning of some of the Tate interviews where he was talking about why he accepted Islam. It was essentially the same psychotheology of Jordan Peterson, where God is a concept that really is the exemplification of my self-help strategy.
Right.
It's like, well, dude, that's not what God is. And so it seems like he was sort of saying, oh, Islam will function as this for me, as a way for me to put God into a system that allows me to say, well, I'm this because that allows me to, you know, do better in life and to get Bugattis or whatever. And I mean, and I know Jordan Peterson doesn't say that the purpose of the God archetype or whatever is to get you Bugattis, but he basically has a similar idea that God is this sort of archetypal thing that helps you in the psychological process of working out your issues, not an actual personal God. That's the key thing.
Right. Yeah, it's a utilitarian approach to religion.
Exactly.
So whether it be, and I could see multiple factors for Andrew. Again, I don't know his heart, so I'm not here to claim what his intentions were, but I just, as an outsider, I could see that if you were him and you were being investigated by the Romanian government, and you had all this money and you had all these dealings with the Middle East, and they have their own banking system, and the West is trying to debank you, it makes sense why it would be very pragmatic to become Muslim, because now you have access to an entire economy and social system that isn't trying to, you know, put you in jail and debank you, but actually allows you some type of maintain your status, and you become an idol for the entirety of the Muslim world.
By the way, so people in the chat, you're right. That was Jim Bob's stream critiquing JBP and Tate. That's right. That was his argument, and that's a really good point, because if God is just a conceptual thing that we can make it into whatever we want to, you know, make us into self-help bros, then that has nothing. That's just basically nothing, right? That's not a God. That's just another self-help path. And so it's like David said, it's just utilitarian. So now, you said you had a list of 5 things that were red pill. Did you want to do that?
To define like what the red pill worldview is, because, you know, we do philosophy and theology, so I always like to see what the paradigm is, and so the red pill is built upon evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology, and evolutionary understandings of sociology. And so it's already rooted in a structure that really doesn't give you moral objectivity. It gives you, okay, this is the way it happens, and this is how we evolved, and this is why women like this. And me as an Orthodox Christian, I don't believe in macroevolution. I think it's actually a nonsensical worldview that has no evidence. Speciation, I can get on board with. The idea that people evolve based on niches, but macroevolution, the leap between species, there's no evidence. I mean, no serious academic even maintains that, because the probability doesn't even match up.
Well, one thing I would say on this point is that I agree with you there about the transmutation of species. I don't think that's a very sensible or coherent theory at all about the origin of life and whatnot. However, I don't know of anything in Orthodox theology or in our system that would contradict the notion of adaptation. And so what I think a lot of what evolutionary psychology is studying in particular is precisely adaptive strategies of different societies and cultures. And I think all of that information is 100% totally relevant. If you look at the interviews that Dr. Edward Dutton does, he doesn't come at this from the red pill perspective. He just comes at it from the academic perspective. He's done a lot of interviews where he basically just makes all of these same points with nothing to do with like the red pill manosphere. He's just making the points from the data and from the papers that, you know, there's certain tendencies in, you know, women to do this. There's certain tendencies in certain cultures for, for example, he had a really good discussion on witchcraft as a survival mechanism for really basically ugly, nasty hoes. Okay, so when they weren't part of society and they couldn't get a mate,
I already agree with him.
When they couldn't get a mate, they would turn to these practices that and somehow they thought empowered them or maybe gave them contact with another group of a coven, right? So they found community when they were sort of no longer part of the mainline community. And a lot of those individuals would be, you know, unattractive women who couldn't find a mate and whatnot. So this is why we get the archetype of the ugly hag, right? Because she's the witch and
she's always childless and she's unmarried.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we see, I did a whole stream on the archetype of the old hag, and we see that is almost the modern woman. They just haven't aged that far yet. It's somebody who's usually, you know, not at the point where they're the old hag with the big nose and the witch hat, but usually sexually promiscuous, unmarried, no children, pursuing their own will. That's what magic is anyways. So it's like, well, geez, it looks like that is, agreeing with the manosphere and the red pill, that is the contemporary landscape for most women.
Yeah, I would highly recommend, for those that have not heard it, go listen to Dr. Dutton's analysis of witchcraft and feminism. It's a fascinating evolutionary psychology approach to this. And I would also say, too, that there's a lot of information in what they call just evolutionary biology. Again, evolution can mean different things, guys. So if we're referring to the study of how the species evolves to adapt to different circumstances,
right,
there's nothing unorthodox about that. That's different than a theory of origins that everybody came from a single-celled organism and that all of the species somehow mutated out of this single-celled origin, and it's all atheism. And that's two different things. Now, for a lot of people, they're connected, but there's no necessary
but they're not. It's an important distinction. Speciation is not macroevolution. Those are two separate processes, of which we have evidence for speciation, and that doesn't go against a creationist worldview. It actually makes total sense. But macroevolution, I would reject that outright. So the red pill worldview is built on evolutionary psychology, biology, and sociology. They often referred to, I wasn't familiar with the doctor you mentioned, but Dr. David Buss and Dr. God Saad, they refer to him a lot. Then it gets into the gynocentric order. And this has to do with the idea that we live in a world in which there's a war on masculinity, and that everything is sort of rigged against men and in favor of women, which I don't totally disagree with. Where I would push the manosphere is, I would say, well, why is that? Why is, because I would argue it's ultimately getting at a spiritual reality to move us towards a one world inverted order towards the end times, which has to feminize men and get us to become less virtuous and give away these boundaries. And so the gynocentrism is part of it. Evolutionary psychology, hypergamy is a big part of what the red pill is. This idea that women are always trying to get their best option, which again, I don't disagree with. And again, if I have a daughter, I want her to get with the best man she can. So this is where I would almost push back on, some of the red pill guys that, and I'm not saying Rollo is one of these, but you could see the people who watch his content. Oh, women are hypergamous, yeah, well, I hope my daughter gets the best man she can. What's wrong with that? From a female perspective, I don't see anything wrong with them trying to get the best man that is available as a suitor for them. So hypergamy is a big part of it, dating up. And so Rollo breaks this down into what he calls beta bucks and alpha, as you can imagine, or beta needs and alpha seeds. And it has to do with betas. For a woman in hypergamy, she's always analyzing two assessments. One he calls the beta needs, which is protection, parental investment, and provisions, what they can provide. Then women are, he would argue, balancing this with their hypergamous nature with the alpha seed, which is men that are physically fit, attractive, and have the best genetics. And so women then are trying to he argues, they're trying to choose the best suitor based on the beta needs, what they can provide, and then the alpha seed, who they actually are, and trying to get the best man somewhere in between the middle there.
Yeah, I read a book one time, just to interject on that, and I want you to keep going with this list, but I read a book that was really good on the biological components of this, which was talking about the different sorts of signals that male and female members of various species do. So basically, this is for all mammals, right? There's certain traits and certain patterns that you'll notice that they biologically give off to attract or to get a mate. Well, there's some obvious ones. We think about peacocking, right? This is the term that the red pill manosphere uses for trying to show out, to show off, right? Peacocks do this. Spiders do this. There's spiders that will like they'll do a little dance. Have you seen that little spider that does this? And he's doing this to attract a mate. And so there's nothing inherently wrong with this, because we're all, I think all of us, sort of biologically wired, obviously, to want the best possible mate in all of the criteria, and that's true for men and women. There's nothing inherently weird or bad or wrong with that. It's a biological hardwiring that we have.
Right. And there's a sort of a misnomer with the peacocking because the book, The Game, as you pointed out, Mystery, the pickup artist, he's like, wear the most outrageous hat or the most outrageous shirt you can wear, or don't wear shoes to the bar, do something to like drastically stand out for he would consider peacocking to make yourself noticeable to women. But peacocking or making yourself noticeable, it doesn't have to be that extreme. I mean, again, just by being well dressed, fit, look people in the eyes. These are ways that you can stand out in the 21st century. So,
Yeah.
again, I like you said, these are nuances where most of the time we don't even disagree with them. It's just like bringing it back into a sort of a middle path.
One point I would make before you do the next one is
Yeah.
that so a lot of the people that we're talking about and the information that they put out, they're not interested in actually giving a philosophy of life or a totality meaning or any kind of ethical grounding.
Right.
Not everybody has to do that, but the problem is that if you're going to predicate a lot of your critiques of modern society and feminism and the gynocentrism on ethics and morals, we need to know a grounding and a basis for ethics and morals.
Exactly.
And most of these people don't believe in any grounding in ethics and morals. They end up being relativistic. And the problem is that if that's the case, then there's no reason why really you have feminism is bad or wrong. It's just as valid as your relative. So they basically fall back into a power relations dynamic, which is the leftist position, which is that there is no truth or falsehood. It's all power relations and oppressor-oppressed dynamics.
Oh, you nailed it. And that would be exactly, if I was debating a manosphere guy and they're making these arguments, I would say, bro, you're the OnlyFans chick of masculinity. Like, you're the one that has no objective standards. You're the one has no moral standards. And I think that perspective kind of opened that floodgate when Leela Rose, a Catholic conservative content creator, sort of criticized Justin Waller, who's a big friend of the Tates, really handsome guy, tall, has his own construction business, millionaire. So he's got all the things that the people are looking for. And he was talking about, yeah, I want to get married. I'm going to have a wife. And she said, well, you say you want to get married and have a wife and have children, but you're also going to have girlfriends. Don't you think that's contradictory? I mean, you talk about all this discipline and working, but then you don't want to have discipline in regards to like a faithful marriage. He's like, well, I'm not wired that way. I try to be monogamous, but I'm not wired that way. And it's like, bro, that's a cop out. Like, if you're going to have children, then you could make an argument for what's the best way children can grow up. And it's not by seeing their dad have a bunch of girlfriends, because that's only going to cause more conflict with maybe animosity between children and father, or father with wife. So, they don't have an objective standard to make their arguments, and they are giving prescription. One of the guys was upset. This is a praxeology, not an ideology. No, bro, like, shut up. You don't even know what you're talking about.
Even if it is, like, okay, but at some point we're going to need some explanation or basis for grounding the morals and the ethics.
Right.
So, yeah, it's fine if you want to give just a praxeology, but if you're going to start making these totalizing universal claims about this being bad, this being horrible, this being manipulative, deceptive, okay, why is it wrong to be immoral, manipulative, and deceptive? Right. So
right.
we gotta have some kind of grounding for the ethical claims, or else none of this is going to get off the ground, and we can't avoid metaphysics either, as I'm sure a lot of these people would like to do. Again, we're just going to, I'm sorry, but we're going to be in the domain of philosophy when we start talking about good versus bad. The good is, on the one hand, both ethical and metaphysical, right? In classical philosophy, the good relates to being, it relates to what is versus what is not versus negation. Those are all just heavy, philosophy terms. So we're going to need more than just saying, what's the data, what are the papers, the data, and just get what feels good for you, bro. I mean, it's got to be more than that.
Exactly. Because I would say that's feminine. That's very feminine.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
It's consumeristic. It's like, bro, a man produces more than he consumes, and the boundaries which we establish in our own lives help define us. That's the point. This is where I would agree again with part of the manosphere, is that men have to make themselves. Women are born with a sense of innate value because they can give birth to children. Men, we're disposable. That's why we die at war. We're the disposable sex. But that means you have to make yourself, and you define yourself and make yourself through the discipline that you put on yourself to develop, whether it's like you and your philosophy and all your knowledge on theology. That took a lot of time, discipline, and effort, but that's what defines a man. No matter what, you could be a mechanic, you could be a plumber, it doesn't matter, but that's what it means to be a man. And so this hedonism that they put forth, because they have no objective morality, I would say it makes them like the women they criticize.
Well, they'll point out too that, you know, the society that's gynocentric is necessarily egalitarian and collectivist, which it is, right? Because
agreed,
it is. However, on what basis then am I supposed to prefer the atomized individual classical liberal society? Now, maybe the classical liberal individual society is better, but you're not going to be able to tell me how it's better on your system's bases. All you can ever say is because it's going to give you more feely points and more pleasure points. So why is that better? Says who? Why? It's just arbitrary.
And that's where, like you pointed out, it gets back to power. Again, anybody who's studied philosophy knows this is the state of 20th century philosophy with Foucault. It comes down to power. There's no longer objective truth.
Right.
And that's why you listen to some of these guys, and I'm not talking about just the main figures, just the rhetoric within the live chats. It's the women are the enemy. And it's like, bro, you've fallen into the same paradigm of the women that you're trying to criticize, because they think the men are the enemy. Oh, the radical feminists. Well, then, and I'm not trying to say they're misogynist or anything. That gets thrown out way too much just generally on the internet. But now they totally have this contempt for women. And it's like, bro, you're not going to get a wife that's going to submit to you when, like, you just, you know, make fun and mock every woman that you see because you are deep down hurt because you've been rejected so many times because you haven't put in the work to become a man worthy enough for a woman to submit to you.
Yeah, well, this is just the male version of the feminist / fat acceptance / you know, gross creature who is, rather than, I mean, there's a lot of vices involved in this. One of those is sloth, right? Right. Rather than self-improving, rather than doing the work that I need to do to make myself better, I'm going to instead blame society for not accepting me and for my own, you know, failures and lack of success. No, it's everybody else's fault. And so now I'm going to just constantly sort of try to feel better about myself by spending all my time on the internet just dissing, you know, OnlyFans chicks or something like that. Like,
right.
That all that is a concession to also the feminine society that you're criticizing. That's a feminine approach to things. Right. It's an approach that says it's a passive aggressive. I'm going to hide behind the keyboard and just diss everybody all day long. When in reality, it's because you failed and also you're lazy. Right.
And I would even tie that mentality with like social justice worries, virtue signaling, and even in the orthosphere, piety signaling. These are ways in which people can try to achieve competency or status without actually engaging in those things by signaling them. So, okay, I'm not very masculine. Well, then I'm gonna berate women and talk about how OnlyFans and how all these girls are whores and stuff like this. It's a way now I can establish my masculinity behind my little handle online. And you know, I think this is a real problem. It's the scapegoating, whether it's whatever it is. If you're scapegoating, the ultimate masculine thing to do is just, as Jocko Willink said, take more responsibility, radical responsibility. Everything's your fault in your life, so now deal with it. And that's going to get you to put your life in order.
Even if everything in your life is not your fault, at a certain point you have to come to the realization that nothing out there is going to ultimately, I'm not talking about in the religious salvific sense, I'm just talking about in your own personal improvement, right? Nothing out there is going to get you the thing that you're after or that you want or that you need, right? Oh, I want a better job. I want this, I want that. Is it if you bitch and complain, is it going to come to you? No. It's going to take you changing your situation. It's just like it's like fat acceptance is the best example of this, because it's like you can't change society to say, oh no, this way of living is actually healthy. No, it's objectively not healthy. And so to engage in a political crusade to try to get society to change its standards so that you can be unhealthy and then delude yourself that you're still healthy, that's actually a form of victim status, which actually suggests, here's the crazy part, which this paper blew me away. I mean, I think we kind of sensed this, but I want you to finish your list there. But when we get to this paper, what's amazing about the paper that we're talking about tonight, the signaling virtuous victimhood as indicators of dark triad personality, is that most of the time people think, oh, the dark triad, that's the manosphere player pickup artists who are using their dark triad skills to get women and to manipulate. Actually, now that can happen, but actually the typical manifestation of the dark triad is consistently seen, the paper argues, in people who do not just virtue signaling, but virtuous victimhood virtue signaling. That's a whole other layer to where the individuals who are not just virtue signaling, but actually virtue signaling their victim status, they most often exemplify and consistently exemplify the dark triad traits of Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. The very opposite of what is actually the case, right? Because they're always saying, oh, you know, I'm a good person. I'm the victim. I'm oppressed. Think about the video that we've talked about a few times in the past few days, which is where the Pearl was arguing with the women on the Vice clip. Brittany Sellner did a video on that clip as well. And at a certain point when Pearl says something, the portly feminist woman says, I don't have to listen to you because you're pretty privileged. I didn't get pretty as a privilege growing up. And so that makes me a victim status. And my opinions are now better. I'm a more moral person than you because you're privileged. So immediately flipping it into oppressor-oppressed dynamic. I guarantee you the person saying that has Machiavellian, narcissistic, psychopathic traits like we see with most of these feminists and these activists, right? The leftist activists, right? They're the ones that have the actual Machiavellian, narcissistic, psychopathy traits. And the more they are narcissistic, Machiavellian, and psychopathic, the more they signal their virtuous victim status.
Right. In related to that, you know, orderliness and cleanliness are associated with godliness, virtue. And as boundaries dissolve, men become more feminine, society becomes more chaotic. And if you listen to these people say, they're like, oh, well, men, they want to erect boundaries because it has to do with their ego. And it's like, well, you start looking at society and maybe the fact we're dissolving boundaries and men are less ego focused to some degree. Now, it can obviously go off the deep end for sure, but it's caused more mental instability. You look at women and men, and their mental health is all over the place. And I would say if society was more ordered and less chaotic, we had more structure and more patriarchy, mental health would go down because people don't know how to deal with the chaos that they're seeing everywhere. And, you know, so when you're talking about the dark triad, to me, that is going to continue to rise as masculinity continues to be, you know, demonized.
Yeah, did you you had five,
moving on the red pill.
Yeah, get through all five and then I'll do some more of this paper. Go ahead.
Okay. Another thing that they really talk about is, again, the dual mating hypothesis, which gets into the hypergamy. So short-term physical fitness, sexual attraction versus long-term and the investment of resources. One of the things that you'll hear if you listen to like the Fresh and Fit podcast, which really is just Myron, the head guy there on Fresh and Fit, all he does is regurgitate Rollo Tomasi. That's all he does. He brings in basically sex workers and sugar babies in Miami. They come on his podcast and they just say the same thing every night. They just get women that are totally obsessed with themselves and, usually whores that are engaged in some type of sex work. And then they're like, showed you're not going to get the high value man because look at your body count, how many people you slept with, and XYZ. And they always say men love idealistically and women love opportunistically, meaning men have this idea that they're going to lock down a woman and she's going to be true to them for their life and they don't have to worry about it and they can just focus on their stuff, where women are constantly, again, hypergamous, looking for the best opportunity to be with the best mate. And so that's another part of this rhetoric, again, just defining the worldview of the red pill. And then it gets to the sexual marketplace value. What is sexual marketplace value? And so this gets into what is a high value man? And so for Kevin Samuels, it was a man that had a career that made six figures, that was somewhat in good shape. Other people won't put such strict categories, like Rollo won't define it as any particular thing, but usually the red pill is always describing a high value man in regards to what you'll hear some people say, oh, it has to do with money, muscles, and game. So your money, your fitness, and then basically your charisma, your ability to socialize, your ability to lure people into your sort of social web. And so the sexual marketplace value then is a man, as he gets older, the idea is that a man has very low sexual marketplace value in his early 20s because he hasn't defined himself, again, through the discipline and the boundary erection. So he has to then work. And then basically they'll say a man in his 30s to 40s is the prime of a man's life. And he then, if he works well and works to the best of his ability, he'll be successful somewhere around, let's say, 33 to 35. And then he can look back and he can get a high sexual market value woman, which is going to be younger, somewhere between 18 and 24. They'll talk about low body counts, pretty, feminine, submissive, and willing to fit into your frame, which we can get into frame. And I actually really support the conversation on frame, because that's one of the problems, even with our Orthodox brothers, is really having your life together that a woman can come and help you do what you do. If you don't know what you're doing, how can you have an Eve? Eve is there to help you, but you have to then have a frame, as I like to use the metaphor. You have to have a boat that is, you have to set sail. You have to be on your way to a destination that then she can come and help you. So they talk a lot about frame, sexual marketplace value.
Let me interject something at this point, which is that when you're talking about, the guys in our sphere, this paper is so instructive. Everybody needs to read this paper, because as I was reading it and thinking about, the leftists and the people in the media that constantly signal their victim status as a way to increase social status, the more I thought about it, the more I realized, hey, actually, this is a big part of what is a problem in the religious sphere as well. It's not just a matter of people that are politically signaling their leftism victim status to acquire social status. So many people in the religious sphere are prone to doing the exact same thing, where they want to signify their spiritual one-upping and nitpicking. And the irony is that the same critique would apply to them, that in most cases, I would venture that the people who are actually doing this, constantly signaling their victim status and their virtue status, they're doing this, as the paper says, as a form of resource extraction. And by resource, the paper doesn't just mean money. It might mean money. It's saying time, attention, all of these things can be a form of resource extraction through not just being a virtue signaler, but a victim status. Just think of, for example, the way every time Michael Lofton makes a video, it's always that he's a victim. For example, anytime somebody criticizes him, it's slander, you've attacked him, and you need to repent. And then he talks about how virtuous and how great he is. That's 100% you'll notice. And this, if you follow this paper and you pay attention to the way so many of the piety signalers, which drive me nuts in the Orthodox sphere,
me too. They hit me all the time,
as well as the evangelical sphere, Roman Catholic sphere, it doesn't matter. All that is a manifestation of Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy to get you to manipulate. It's a manipulation tactic, as the paper shows, to acquire social status and resource transfer.
Exactly. Amen. And again, we see it in all spheres. That's why I said, it doesn't matter if you're a virtue signaler, you're a social justice warrior, you're a piety signaler in the orthosphere, or you're a feminist victim of the world, or you're a manosphere guy, and your whole angle is being a victim of the world, and how people need to really relate to you and care for you because you're so disenfranchised by the gynocentric order. All this stuff, this is not a masculine approach at all.
Exactly.
No, and that's where, as you as well, I know, even within the religious sphere, men use piety to, as you said, acquire social status, as opposed to using skill. again,
Well,
this
it's
is
not
super.
even real piety. It's feigned internet piety,
Exactly.
which is
Yeah,
even
it's not
worse.
even real piety, and it's always public piety, which is the worst form of piety
Which
if
is
you're
what
actually
Jesus says
pious and
don't do,
orthodoxy.
right? Go into your prayer room and pray in your corner, Jesus says. Don't pray on the streets like the Pharisees, showing everybody how pious you are. That's the worst. And he said God doesn't listen to that. So it's a waste of time. It's performative. You have your reward, he says. And if you read this paper, you'll notice that, as the paper says, the thesis is, I'll read this real briefly. It says, we investigate in this paper the consequences and predictors of omitting signals and victim status and virtue. In our first 3 studies, we show that virtuous victim signal can facilitate non-reciprocal resource transfer from others to the signaler. In other words, the motivation is, if I can demonstrate not just that I'm a victim, but that I'm a virtuous victim, I'm able to extract much more out of you, whether that's time, attention, social media attention and clicks, empathy, or money. It might be all of those. The paper goes on to say, we develop and validate victim signaling scale, and we combine that with an established measure of virtue signaling to operationalize the virtuous victim construct. We show that individuals that have dark triad traits of Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy more frequently will signal their virtuous victimhood status. And we control for both demographic and socioeconomic variables in the paper. So the last point here, it says, throughout the study, we show that this is common in Western societies because the West, through its democratic structure, it argues later in the paper, has actually elevated victim status to be its own culture, the culture of victimhood. And so perceptive and Machiavellian people understand that being a victim is actually a way to accrue social status in the West. That's crucial. And that's part of that gynocentric society. Where everybody can accrue social status. Oh, I'm a victim, I'm a victim, oh, I'm oppressed, I'm oppressed. Here's what it says at the end. It says, the rest of these studies point out that our thesis is correct, that the frequency of emitting virtuous victim signals predicts a person's willingness to engage in and endorse ethically questionable behaviors, such as trying to earn a bonus or the intention of purchasing counterfeit products. These are some of the papers that are some of the tests that they run later on in the paper. They give people these different scenarios to see how they would work. And it says that the result then is that in most cases, those who were willing to constantly signal their victim status were also the ones that were the most unethical, is the point.
Yeah, I definitely believe that. I definitely believe that. In regards to, again, just wrapping up here, the red pill, you know, one of the things that I would definitely agree with them is that men and women want different things. And so part of the stuff that Kevin Samuels exposed before he passed away was, you talk to these women, maybe she's okay, she's halfway attractive, she hop on, he would do Zoom things, and he would just allow these women to come in, and he would, and that's why people, it was so popular, people watch, because he would just blow them out and almost humiliate them. And so he like, okay, so how old are you? Oh, I'm 33. Okay, what are you looking for? Oh, I need a man who makes 6 figures. He's 6 foot. He needs to be fit with the 6-pack and have a nice job. Okay, how tall are you? Oh, I'm 5 foot. How much do you weigh? 150, 160. Okay, well, you're a little big. How big's your dress size? Oh, I'm a 10 or something. And he's like, ma'am, you don't even qualify for that. And she's like, well, I make $80,000. I have a job. And the point is, men don't give a damn how much a woman makes, because that's not our money. And so if I'm getting in a relationship with a woman, it doesn't matter how much money she makes, how driven she is with her career, all these attributes that we would consider masculine. That is not what we would consider a high value man would be looking for in regards to a woman. And so he really put these women on blast, which became really popular online. So women and men are looking for totally different things. And unfortunately, modern women think that men are looking for the same things that they're looking for.
Exactly.
So then when they market themselves on the sexual marketplace, they're like talking about the car they drive and how much money they have and how successful they are. And they're like interconnection. They're the circles they're connected to. And
yeah,
like,
I don't care about you being a CEO. I'm not interested in that. It doesn't impress me one bit.
exactly. And so what a man would be, whose high value be looking for, is a woman who's pure, a woman who's honest, a woman who's young and pretty, a woman who wants to be a mother, a woman who's submissive to his frame. So a frame is, again, my life, my worldview, what I'm doing, and that a woman needs to accommodate herself to you. And that's where even my Orthodox brothers, guys, do not simp for a woman. Do not be moving or changing your opinion or changing things about yourself because you want the attention of a woman. That is you fitting to her frame. And I would say even this gynocentrism and these dark triad traits, these are men actually fitting into a female gynocentric frame.
Well, I wanted to make a point of that. Yeah, so the paper actually notes that the only way that this could have become a way to increase your social status in the West is if the West had already adopted a radical presupposition of egalitarianism, that everybody is equal, everybody's the same, everybody deserves and has some claim on everything coming equally, right? Which is essentially just kind of fundamental, weird kind of Marxism of some kind, some kind of weird kind of socialism, which is just simply, I mean, says who? I mean, nature itself doesn't fit everyone equally. Biology doesn't fit everyone equally. Why would we think that, therefore, everything should come in some sort of egalitarian doling out of everything being fair? That's, again, a much more of a feminine approach to things, right?
Right. Based the way your mom deals with the kids that are upset.
Yeah. That's not based on not the masculine approach to what's the objective reality and the facts of the matter, right? Which are that no, nature fits certain people better than others for certain tasks. And by the way, we can still have an equality in some sense, in another sense, and be unequal in other senses. So that there's another presupposition that goes on with this, which is that everything must be one type of thing. So if we're equal, you must be always equal in every single sense. Well, we might be equal in the sense of all possessing human nature, but how we exist and have that nature doesn't necessarily have to be the same or equal either. Men can have different roles from women and still have the same nature.
Right. And that's where a religious worldview is, that we complement each other. So the idea that a woman's better with children, the woman is more like, she should stay home, be a stay-at-home mother, take care of the house. That's because we have different natures. Men are hunters, gatherers. We go out and we're more factual. We're world oriented. We're trying to do something, build something, find something. And so, this is just basic human nature that, again, the world we live in now has totally inverted everything. And so the women literally market themselves sexually as men. And then the men, they're becoming more like women.
Well, that's part of that egalitarian push, and the paper even notes that, and it's not trying to take a stance, it's trying to look at the data, but the paper even notes that this whole culture has given rise to the idea of the oppression Olympics. So now whoever can be and demonstrate the most victimhood status is actually at the top of the goblin totem pole. And so that's what I was saying the other night was, okay, so now the lesbian Islamic Jeffrey Dahmer is at the top of the totem pole because he's the most fringe character. But I mean, so you see what I'm saying? Like, the logic of that is that I'm the most oppressed because I'm the most fringe. There's the fewest of me. I'm serious, right?
Yeah, no, I know. It's
true. The inversion totem pole, then that allows the worst moral people to then say, I am at the top of the totem pole of social status because I'm the most oppressed, because society doesn't accept that I want to eat people and I'm a lesbian Islamic cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer person, right?
Well, bro, I just saw it was the ACLU. I retweeted on Twitter. They just posted a thing like yesterday defending, because a man is in prison who is trying to transition to a woman and the prison wasn't letting him transition and recognize his pronouns. His crime was that he is a pedophile necrophiliac who viciously stabbed a 14-year-old girl years ago, then raped her dead body.
All right, watch out. Don't get my stream taken down.
Oh, my bad. That's fine. Anyways, he engaged in all this stuff, and it was totally put to the side. And this particular organization put out a public notification talking about how he was oppressed. He was oppressed by the jail system because they didn't recognize his pronouns.
The paper goes on to say that there's a section of the population that is cunning enough to realize that you can excuse any of your actions if you can figure out a way to fit into a victim status niche of society. And it actually points out that for a lot of the people engaged in the virtuous victimhood virtue signaling, that they reasoned that it was that their actions were excused when they were being deceptive and when they were engaging in the dark triad traits because they were victims, you see. So because I'm a victim, I'm not subject to the normal ethical constraints and I'm complaining about other people. But I'm the victim, so it excuse, which is that narcissism of the triad, right? Where I'm not bound by the rules that I'm applying to everyone else, and my evil is excused because I'm a victim, you see. And it goes on to say that that section of the population that is cunning enough to figure that out. By the way, this also applies. Think about how feds work, right? Feds that infiltrate, right? They will do and operate the exact same way, like COINTELPRO and this kind of stuff. It notes that dark personalities can flourish as social parasites who intentionally attempt to extract the resources of their environments without providing any benefit. Similarly, Jones, one of the researchers, theorized that predatory social parasites can use a variety of mimicry and deception strategies to integrate themselves into different communities so that they can extract the resources of those communities all at once or over time. The great example of this, it says, are con men who infiltrate themselves into societies to do so. So basically saying that the victim signalers are basically like con men.
Right. That makes total sense to me. Just to wrap up the red pill here, I was just trying to finish up by talking about the sexual marketplace value. So therefore, high value men are men that work on themselves, that attain some type of social status, success, monetary wealth, and physical fitness in their 30s, and they're going to have the most leverage to then look at the highest value women on the sexual marketplace value, which are going to be young, low body counts, pretty, feminine, submissive, and all these sorts of things. And so the women, they hit what Rollo Tomasi calls the epiphany phase, which is usually around 28, 29, moving into their 30s, where they look, oh man, I've had hot girl summers since I was 18 and got out of high school. And I'm looking around and now all my friends have babies. They're all married. I want to get married too. And so the epiphany phase he talks about is where these girls become religious or they become self-conscious and they start presenting themselves in different ways, which we've seen with OnlyFans girls that are already born again Christians and all this type of stuff. So the sexual marketplace, I'm only highlighting that because part of the red pill is understanding this dynamic, how men attain social value, how women attain social value, how women are born with it, how men have to achieve it, have to attain it, and then how these women then who lose their value because they go through their 20s and maybe they're very promiscuous, they're doing the clubs every night, they're doing, you know, multiple relationships. Now they come to a state where they become self-conscious of that fact. They're realizing, man, I need to lock down a man, and those high value men don't want those women. So that creates this whole problem, which now we're seeing in society right now, which we're seeing like the late 20, 30-year-old woman who can't get married. One, because the average man, this is another thing tied to this, is that you look at the sexual like hierarchy, the average man is totally disenfranchised. Well, the average woman that he would be with, say 200 years ago, they'd be married and have a family. She's probably a feminist. She probably has purple hair. Like you're talking about like the ugly witches, right? Well, weren't they supposed to marry like the guys that are on that level too? Historically, they would have been together, but they're not going to get married. They're not going to have children. So then these guys who maybe they still want to get married, but now they can't. And that's part of this whole MGTOW black pill section of men, is that they're in a place where they really can't see themselves getting out of it. And so men then have no incentive to marry. This is my wrapping up the red pill, is that men have no incentive to marry because of the divorce, because of the gynocentrism, because of yada, yada, yada. And so the best thing to do is spin plates or have maybe more of a domestic relationship with a girl. Or if you really want to, or they'll even give the caveat, if you're religious, then you can go get married. So that's generally speaking a good outline of the worldview, what the red pill is and what they're talking about.
Yeah, I want to remind everybody, too, that the show sponsor is Chalk.com, the best supplements that you can get a hold of. My favorite is, of course, the Tonkat Ali, and that's really relevant to what we're talking about tonight because Tonkat Ali is proven in peer-reviewed studies to boost testosterone. You can go read the studies that they have over at choq.com. That's chalk.com. But they have a lot of other options too. There's the Shilajit, which is great. Jamie loves that for mental focus and clarity. If you're looking for overall supplementation in terms of what minerals are lacking in our diet, I recommend the 7 Wonders. If you're looking for energy boost, there's also the Action 2.0. And there's many, many other supplements you can get a hold of over at chalk.com. I've got a couple examples right here by my head. There is the chocolate and there is the cacao beans. If you're into that kind of stuff, if you want to put some of the chocolate in your morning smoothie regimen, however you go about that, go check out chalk.com. They also have stacks, or at least lists, I should say, for men and for women. So if you're a woman and you're interested in chalk.com, you don't know which ones to get, check out the stack for women. Try that out. If you're a dude, check out the stack for dudes. I guarantee you that you will enjoy the Tonkat Elite for sure if you're a guy. Chalk.com, choq.com, and be sure to use the promo code JAY50 to get 50% off. Chalk is an excellent, awesome based red pill company. They've been our sponsors for almost 2 years, I think. So we love chalk.com. So be sure and use the promo code JAY50. That's JAY50 to get 50% off. And if you want a little more discount, you can use the promo code JAY53LIFE. That's JAY53LIFE to get 53% off. The other thing I want to remind you guys about is that you can get tickets to our event in Hollywood. We'll be live with a 5-hour event that includes philosophy, that includes comedy, that includes getting to go meet and see Jamie Kennedy. He's going to be doing stand-up. So there's your tickets right there at our LA venue. That will be July 6th in Hollywood. So go ahead and get those tickets right now. Also, be sure and subscribe to our buddies, our co-sister brother podcasts over there on Grand Theft World at Rockfin. That is Richard Grove's podcast, Grand Theft World, the best podcast when it comes to geopolitics and the current events in terms of news, what's really going on. Richard is a forensic historian, and he's one of the best out there. So be sure and subscribe to Grand Theft World. It's literally the best geopolitical news podcast out there. So getting back to the red pill issues, one last thing I would say about this paper to sum up was just that the individuals who were engaged in a lot of virtuous victimhood signaling were also very quick to make use of any crises. And so the paper actually notes that they were often never let a good crisis go to waste, because this allowed them, as it says at the end of the paper, to utilize a tactic. And so it is specifically a known tactic amongst these people, whether they have this consciously in their mind as a tactic or whether just sort of innately doing this as a sort of a innate scam that they know about and without thinking about it, second nature, I don't know. But he says that basically the paper says it's a resource extraction scam for social influencing and to gain social status. That's the key crux of all of this. And how relevant is that to social media? So if it's a tool for social influence, that is victimhood status, you better believe it's going to be used on social media. And we see it everywhere. And once you read this paper and once you're aware of this tactic, this scam, you're going to notice it everywhere. You're going to notice that the people that are claiming victimhood status, that are engaged in Machiavellian techniques and strategies, psychopathy, narcissism, that triad is usually usually what characterizes the people that are mostly signifying their virtuous victimhood status.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And so, yeah, it's all over the place at this point, our society, no matter what sphere you're in, really. Do you want to get into where do you want to go next? Criticisms, general criticisms. I know you had a sort of a plan for it. I would say let's begin with, like, for those listening, what is masculinity? How would we as traditional Christians define what masculinity is? And maybe we can then go riff off like what exactly the manosphere is talking about.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I was thinking earlier about a philosophy of these things, right? So it's not like there's some self-evident idea of what it is to be high value, to what it is to be high status. I mean, in relation to what? Says who? I mean, exactly. What is that, right? And so the same thing goes with what it is to be feminine and what it is to be masculine. They cannot be social constructs. They have to be actually existing qualities or metaphysical realities. And I think that if we're going to need a worldview or a system that actually posits that, And so I would say first and foremost, that's where we got to start. Yeah, we got to have something that grounds the notion of masculinity beyond just traits. So being buff. Okay, yeah, that's a masculine trait, but is that the essence of masculinity? Attaining wealth. Okay, yeah, that's a thing that a man can do, and it can be a positive thing. It's not inherently bad to have money or to have wealth. If you're going to be in the world and have a family, you got to do that. I mean, right. even monks ask for money and they gain wealth. Okay, so it's not like there's some realm where, oh, well we don't do that because we're good vibes. Look how virtuous I am as a Christian. I don't believe in money. Yeah, right. Like Paul says, the labor is worthy of his rate. Even the apostles ask for money. This is ridiculous. So God is not. So God is the author of money.
Right.
Do people not realize that? Do you realize there's a lot of principles in the Bible that deal with money, that deal with fair weights and balances in Proverbs? That's fair transaction and value. Okay. That's not inherently anti-religious or inherently worldly. Now, love of money is an idol and is evil. But money itself is not bad, it's not evil. So if it was, then there wouldn't be the tithe. This is so obvious, right? So look, money and attaining a wealth cannot be the essence of masculinity. So these are traits that would accompany or are part of masculinity. But there's got to be something more than any of these traits that can also be to a degree had amongst females, right? For example, females can be good in battle. I'm not saying that's what they should do, but they could be. There are really buff women on Instagram, which I find to be really gross and weird. Yeah. But they can be strong. So is that what character? So are they therefore men because they're strong? No, there's got to be more than certain traits that we find that accompany men, right? There's something more spiritual, something more philosophical, more theological ultimately. And I think ultimately it goes back to these ideas being grounded in the doctrine of creation, man being created as Adam and Eve.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Being made in the image of God, first of all, is what gives us a unique ontology as mankind. And so this evolutionary worldview doesn't really privilege the unique status of men and women. So I always say, I use a metaphor that men are the go ahead.
Yeah, well, one point on that, which is that a lot of the red pill people, for example, the manosphere people, they will say women attained a cunning nature because they were the weaker sex to survive. Which, okay, I don't have a problem saying that that's true. Okay, so when women were, in ancient medieval times or whatever, maybe, or think of the Middle Eastern world when women were like property and a conquering tribe might take over another tribe. And now if you're a woman to survive, you're going to have to rely on your cunning and not your physical strength and prowess, right? Okay, maybe that's true. But if that's an evolutionary survival trait, and the feminists are engaging in using cunning and dark triad traits as the paper notes, then why do you have a problem with it?
Why is it bad?
Yeah.
Seems like that's what nature is
exactly
procured from them. Yeah, they have no answer for it. And that's where ultimately, and we'll get back to it, is like, I would love to ask somebody after going through and highlighting like all the ills and all the misfortunes against men, this gynocentric worldview, is say, well, why do you think that is? Do you think this is just so happens? Because they'll get into, like Rollo's talked about, 21st century thinking versus 20th century thinking. And so somebody, when he tweeted that vasectomy tweet, they said, well, that's a great way for your lineage to stop. And he said, oh, focused on lineage, that's so 20th century thinking. And I'm thinking, no, bro, that's like what a man thinks about, is I want to have sons. I'm the last male of my family line. And that goes generations. Just so I'm the last one and from my dad's line, and so I want to have sons. I would like to have multiple sons so that my name and my genes continue on. That's like a sexual innate drive for men. Men want their lineage to go on. But anyways, what I was going to say is I always use this metaphor on my stream that men are the castle walls and women or children are the jewels. And so men being strong in their values become erected boundary makers, and they prevent things from taking and let's say pillaging the jewels, the women and the children. We look at our society, because we're so weak, who are the ones that are most affected by this boundary dissolution process in our society? And I would say it's the women and the children. because you look at who's taken over female sports, who's taken over female locker rooms, who is, focused on aberrant forms of sexuality that are involving minors, even when they call themselves maps, as I'm sure you're talking about. I want to avoid any hot words here, but what a man is, what masculinity is, I would say, are actually tied to things that are non-physical. So the way that the manosphere often describes what a man is, masculinity, is going to tie to material things you can touch: his body, how much money he has, his size of his house, how beautiful his wife is. And it's like, really, as a Christian man, what I would think about, what defines a man is really masculine, is like his courage, his honor, his skills, his self-sacrifice, which again we can see from Christ. A man takes responsibility for things, and he puts things on his back and he deals with them. And so a man, or high value man, like I would love to ask him, okay, high value man, well, what are the high values? Because
I mean, how are you gonna have values without value judgments and without virtues, right? Virtue ethics really is the only way out of this whole dilemma, and the only worldview that gives an account for virtue ethics, I would argue, is the one that we have. Hence, why part of the reason why we have it, right? So, as somebody in the chat noted correctly, yeah, I mean, the reason that a lot of the manospheres ethics are do what thou wilt is because that's why they tend towards that libertarian ethos. And I'm not saying everything in libertarianism is wrong, but I'm saying that if the ultimate highest principle of libertarianism is just my own self-interest in the sense of my own pleasures, then then that leads to a power oppressed, power might makes right dynamic. So that you have no reason to say then that if a feminist and the left is engaging in these manipulative dark triad tactics to beat us, then you have no basis to say that's wrong. They're just doing what is their power dynamic, right?
Right.
So
exactly.
we need a basis for virtue and vice, and so you're going to have some kind of ethical framework of system.
Right. And that's where I would argue a high value man lives up to the highest of values. And so then as a Christian, we can then define what those values are, and then men trying to embody them and live up to them characterize what a high value man, and that may then lead to material success, wealth, physical fitness, status, all this stuff. I'm not saying that those can't be byproducts of the virtues that we would then posit as Christians, but there's a difference. Which one comes first? We're focusing on the virtues and living up to an objective standard that pre-exists creation, we would argue. Then this idea that a high value man is really just attaining wealth and social status for the utility and access to more women. Well, that seems really gay. That doesn't seem like somebody who's like self-sacrificing, because as you said, this libertarian ethos within the manosphere is not about self-sacrifice. It's about acquisition.
So Rollo says critiquing Jordan Peterson that you shouldn't be manning up for the sake of a woman, right? That was his whole critique. So Peterson was saying, well, it's the men's fault. Time to man up. You gotta man up, bucko. and his argument was man up for women, right? You've got to man up and engage in all of these self-sacrificial practices for the woman. And Rollo's critique was, why do I have to man up for the woman in a classical liberal worldview? Right? If Jordan Peterson's worldview is the case, there's nothing that's like impels me to have to man up for what? For a situation where I'm going to get screwed over? That doesn't make any sense. So there's got to be more to it, right, than just manning up for a woman. And ironically, the player sort of game attitude is like, well, I'm going to do everything in my self-interest just to have pleasure. But it's like, wait a minute, you're still oriented towards doing everything that you're doing for women. So it's like, I thought you were trying to escape that. And that's the logic of the MGTOW guys who are like, no, you're still serving women when you're in that attitude. So you see, it's time to just be an incel, bro, and let's just go play video games.
Right. No, you nailed it. And I would totally agree with that. And that's why living up to these higher values and objective values, you shouldn't be becoming a high value man to get a woman. And that's where in my speech that I did at Montanica, the theme of the conference was seek first the kingdom of God. And my point was that if a man wants to become a man, he needs to do that. And if he does that sincerely and includes his physical fitness, and it includes the idea of that his job, his career is tied to his spirituality with God, well, seek that first. Seek the kingdom of God first, and then working on every aspect of your life. And then provident God can bring the woman who's looking for that quality of man. The problem with the orthosphere, and I apologize, I'm stepping on some guys' toes here, is they want women, and they're not the type of men that those women would want. And it's like, that's where you have to be a little bit more self-aware. And that's where I would totally agree with the red pill and the manosphere talk about male growth and
yeah. So let's just be frank here. There's a lot of dorks, and they don't know how to talk to women. They've never talked to a woman. They're terrified of walking over and initiating conversation. I mean, come on, it's time to stop being a dork. That's the key here.
And I had, dude, I'm not kidding. I talked to one guy. He was like, man, there's a really cute girl at my parish, and I was trying to talk to her, and I was like, well, what were you talking about? Theology, bro. Why are you going up to girls like
total ignorance? Total ignorance.
This is not for women, bro. This is not women. That women are definitely interested in some women, but I'm saying if you're going up to a girl at a parish that you think is cute, don't be talking about the energy essence distinction. What are you doing?
Yeah, this is a total misunderstanding of what a woman is and how she operates and how she thinks, and what a guy is and how they operate, right? It's the exact flip of what you were saying about the career women who think that what men want is what they are portraying through their careerism.
Oh, great point.
This is the flip version of that, where the nerd guy thinks that, oh, girls are going to like me when I show that I've read all the church fathers and I can explicate the access energy distinction and I can talk. No, they don't. No, you just come off as a complete dork, and because women are not wired for that, right? So if you want to get a girlfriend, number one, work on your appearance. Work on your gait, the way that you walk. Don't walk around like a spur with something stuck up his butt, running around like this all the time.
Or shuffle your feet around all the time.
These kinds of things are where you want to focus, like learning how to act like a normal human being, right? A person who can have a mundane conversation. You might be a nerd who doesn't want to do that, but if you want to be able to get around in this world, you need to learn how to do that, how to have normal conversations about normal stuff, right?
Right. And so, finding objective virtues and values to aim for, that's what a man should be aiming for. And we look at history, like men were all about honor. And so that's why so many men were willing to sign up and die on a battlefield, because, okay, I'll get married at a young age, I'll have children at a young age, and now it's time for my honor. And so maybe I'm enlisted in the military, or I go do something, or I build something. Like, we just have no honor as men in the present world. And I would say this would be a critique I would aim at the manosphere, is they don't talk about honor enough. The idea of getting, it's all utility. It's all commodification. It's all consumerism. It's like, bro,
that's because for them it's all tied to libertarianism and the pleasure principle and utilitarianism, which the connections are all there. And it's like maximizing happiness is maximizing the moral calculus pleasure principle, right? Going back to Bentham and all those guys. But that's because their whole ethos is immanentized, right? So everything that they're talking about is immanentized because it's a materialistic idea of what exists and what men's telos and orientation is. So if you don't have a transcendent telos, then everything's going to be oriented to the here and the now and just the pleasure principle. So we need virtue ethics. That's classical ethics in the sense of, you can even go to the Aristotle, right?
Right.
And if you look at Ambrose, for example, St. Ambrose, we had Dr. Sean Stead, when he presented his paper a couple years ago at the Sophia conference, he showed how what Ambrose does is just take the classical Greek virtues and apply them in a Christian context. And that's essentially what David Patrick Henry is doing here. He's saying, look, there's these principles that people like Aristotle talked about, courage and honor and these kinds of things, and they absolutely are part of our worldview, because we do have a virtue ethic.
Right. And that's what you as a man should be focused on. And that's why, again, I was at Montanica talking to a group of people, and I knew I was talking to 20-some-year-old, 30-year-old men who felt like they were, again, almost consumers of the manosphere. But you ask them, they have no purpose, they have no skill set. And I'm not stepping on anybody's toes or mocking anybody who feels that way of their life right now, because that's a real problem just based the way that our world is. And so I would then, as a advice would be, again, that's why you need to pray. You need to get in touch with God. You need to really focus on working on yourself, developing yourself, self-development, so that you can figure out, oh, okay, I'm good at these things, I'm not good at these things, and work on yourself, focus on what's in your control. And then they focus too much on what's out of their control, like the women.
Yeah.
Like, dude,
So yeah, whining and complaining about the things that they can never.
Whining and complaining about women,
things that you can never change or fix, right? This is a classic thing of all leftists, which shows that these people actually just have a leftist mindset, which is to whine and complain about the things that can never be altered or changed. And you know, I'm not a Stoic, but if you've read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which we've done a whole lecture on that, the Stoics had a great point, which is that, look, why are you going to focus on the world and all the things that you can never affect or change? You can never change what somebody's doing a million miles away. You're never going to change everybody's mind about whatever you think about this or that, right? It's like Marxists and this sort of idealistic perception that they have that I can fix the world and change everybody's mind about how they think about equality and fairness and all this stuff. No, you can't. The Stoic would say, look, you can fix what's in your life. That's within your domain of something that you can fix. So focus on that, not on problems a million miles away that you don't have any connection to and will never be able to fix. It's ridiculous.
Right. Like the Great Reset, you know, things that we talk about. People are so focused, and even in our orthosphere, they're so focused on things that are out of their control. It's like, bro, look, you're 30 pounds overweight, man. And you're asking for a virgin girl. Are you serious right now? Like, have some self-awareness and work on yourself. So that's a huge
That's a great point. Yeah, the lack of self-awareness, exactly right. And I remember in my 20s when I was a super nerdy theology guy, I remember having to learn these lessons as well, because it was like, you know, I was probably 20 pounds overweight. I was drinking beer all the time, constantly drinking. I mean, I wasn't an alcoholic, but I'm saying, like, you know, drinking every weekend. And, you know, all the conspiracy stuff, all the problems in the world. And it's like, well, wait a minute. What have I done to actually change my own situation, right? I'm whining about all this stuff about, oh, the New World Order and all this kind of, and that's all true. But what's that going to just put me in a black pill situation? What am I going to do with a black pill situation? Just be miserable?
Right.
No, you have to take the initiative.
And that's where I would say the real white pill, then, although it's difficult, is that suffering is tied to being a man. And you have to embrace that. That's what we do as Christians. But you have to realize that the only way you progress is suffering. The only way you look good in the gym is by suffering in the gym, by exhausting your muscles. The only way you read all those books you read, the only way you do overviews of Carol Quigley is that you suffer through the discipline of going through it. Christ is the ultimate representation of what a man is, because he took the most suffering. He took the sins of the world, which he wasn't even responsible for. And that's where taking responsibility, taking ownership, and then realizing that suffering is not something to be avoided, or you're going to be in your coon pod. You're going to be of these libertarian ethics where, again, like you talk about, these only focus on the immediate moment, immediate pleasure, the avoidance of suffering. If you're trying to avoid suffering, the devil already has you, bro. Because you're like cattle that are just being herded right into the pen where you're going to be slaughtered.
Well, I'm going to be really precise here, because I can already anticipate what a lot of like MGTOW or men's rights guys are going to say. Oh, so you're telling me that my job is to totally be self-immolated on the altar of marriage and getting screwed over in the marriage courts, and that's my duty as a man. No, that's not what we're saying. That's not what I'm saying. The point is that, look, life is going to bring suffering. So it's going to be part of life. I'm not saying you need to try to, in some weird sadomasochistic way, take on ridiculous, absurd levels of suffering. That's weird and crazy. But rather, the attitude of a lot of the manosphere and the red pill people is, oh, I'm going to live for pleasure and thus avoid all suffering and just live for my moral calculus pleasure points. And that's actually a feminine, that's a form of, I'm going to have my own little security blanket of my feelies and all this kind of stuff. That's a gynocentric way to live.
Right. Exactly. And I would say even I would say, Justin Waller has some good things that to say about men's issues right now, but him saying that I'm not wired that way, that I would definitely, if I was married and had kids, I'd still have to have multiple girlfriends. That's feminine. That's a lack of, even if you have that temptation, again, as a Christian, and he calls himself a Christian, he identifies as a Christian, that dying to the world is part of that suffering. So even if you have those temptations for all those other women, not acting on them is actually part of your salvific journey. That's part of your, again, being a man and like defining more boundaries. So that's where again, if we were looking at criticisms, my first criticism is like, what exactly is the role of masculinity in men? And for them, men are just supposed to make money, gain status, and then get with the best woman you can. And then,
I mean,
if
so
you want,
it's
you
just
can have,
it's just hedonism. I mean, it's like,
just
what,
hedonism.
like, how is that a better choice than any of the other options of what we were? So there's all of this ruckus and whining about the status of things, and then the answer is what? Just pleasure point. This is like the
spin more plates, bro.
The mice that are pushing the little thing that gives them the
cocaine.
Yeah,
that's exactly what they are, and that's why the grift is so profitable, because the men just want more of the cocaine. They just want more of the pleasure. So what is the ultimate point of becoming high value for the manosphere? And this is generally speaking on many of the people I've listened to. It's so that you can have autonomy and choose the woman that you want and have more access to women. And so the discipline that they talk about is always fitness, money, career. You focus on all those things and you get all those game attributes elevated. Now you can focus and you can just pick the girl you want. And it's like, well, then the next question is, what is the role that men play in society? Is it just to get with women? I mean, because that seems pretty futile. I would say it's to build structures. It's to build society. It's to contribute to something that is beyond who I am. My goal right now is to build something, get married, have children that last longer than I do. That's the point of a man. And the lack of any focus on children and marriage, I think, is really an undermining of what men should be doing. And I would then agree with them that, well, why would I get married if my girl, she's just going to get unhappy and she's going to divorce me and I'm going to lose half? I would agree. That's why you have to be religious. That's why the woman that I'm marrying believes in God so much that she will do exactly what I say.
Well, one thing I'll say where I will give 1 point to the Tates as opposed to Rollo is that Rollo will say that he doesn't believe in conspiracies and that none of this really relates to like a conspiratorial thing going on. Whereas at least I know Tristan and I talked about it, but there is a push on the part of elites to promote the idea that everything is equalitarian, that men are bad, and that we shouldn't have families. And here's the ironic part of that, which is that a lot of these red pill people actually serve to help destroy the family. And if they're helping to destroy the family, then that's fitting into this overall elitist narrative. But I mean,
because the women hate the feminists, I should say, hate the nuclear family. So one of the biggest enemies for the feminist, egalitarian, leftist, communal, communal, whatever you want to frame it as, is to do away with the nuclear family. Why? Because it's paternal and it's patriarchal. And it's like, if we're then promoting masculinity, we should promote men to become the best men that they can be, to get the best women that they can have, so that those women will submit and have the biggest and best families they can have. That would, to me, would seem like the general sphere, but it stops short of that last part of legacy, of children. And I would say it's because they have no transcendent value. They have no God.
Yeah, it's all immanentized.
The relationship under.
Yeah, everything is immanentized. That's why it's all just utilitarianism.
And so, like, I'm getting married and maybe they'd call me a cuck or whatever for doing, but it's like, well, I'm taking a vow with a woman that we're going to be together into eternity. And we're very serious about that. And we both believe that. And there's no idea of divorce. But that's only because of the prerequisite values of the religious worldview that we both adopted. And so if you want to be a man and you want to get that young girl, it's like, you better be religious. And that's where, again, I'm not promoting Islam, but I can see then the rational mind of these young men, like, oh, well, I'll just become Muslim then, because the reason why that woman will submit to you is because she's Muslim and she believes in that worldview. If she was some Western OnlyFans girl, like, why would she submit to you? If women are hypergamous, as they say, and they're only interested in your how you look and then your money and your status, and they're always going to be opportunistic and get the next one, well, then why would you even be with a secular woman? That makes zero sense. And yet they're still advocating for how to pick, PUA, pick up artists, and how to get secular girls and take them back and sleep with them. It's like, that doesn't make any sense to me. It's like you guys are creating the same thing that you're fighting. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's just the inverse of the feminist, right? So
Yeah.
we're coming up on 2 hours, and we want to get to the super chat. So if you want to go ahead and if you want to finish up your list of critique.
Yeah. So I had what are men willing to die for? That's something I asked Uber Boyo, one of my buddies comes on. He's a Nietzschean. We've got into it multiple times. He's a relativist. And I'm like, bro, like, what do you talk about masculinity and like the Ubermensch and the Superman, but like, what are you willing to die for? And he thought about it. It's kind of like himself and his family. And okay, I can give you that, but it's like a man has to have something to die for. That's reason, people would go to war because they had pride in their family, they had pride in their nation, they had pride in their mother tongues and all this different stuff. So for me, I have the patriarchy to die for. I have orthodoxy. I have a family, and then I'm going to create my own family, and I'm going to put the onus on taking care of my parents. For example, my mother's not in the best health. Well, I'm not letting her go to a nursing home. I'm going to put that on my shoulders, and I'm going to take care of her until she passes away in my own possession. That's a sense of responsibility. And so asking men, like, what are you willing to die for is a huge thing on if you're living just for yourself or you have a larger purpose. And then
hold on. So to the people that maybe you guys just joined, people like Hanzo that are complaining in the chat. So we've already given all of the concessions to the areas that we agree. So yeah, if Red Pill is helping nerdy dudes figure out how to go and have a conversation with a woman, absolutely, we agree with that. Yeah, that's a good thing. We're not just lodging complaints. So you missed the first half of our talk
where we agreed with actually probably over half of what the manosphere talks about. Like I have the agreements here. The world is against men and privileged women. Modern secular relationships are terrible and falling apart. Women on social media are out of control and narcissistic.
Right.
Men need to improve. Beta simps. Men need to become more masculine. High value, pure women. And then the average woman overvalues themselves. That's another fact, is that the average woman, due to social media, because they can garner so much attention through photos, the average looking girl thinks she's a dime piece.
Right.
Which totally, then again, if you're the average man, you're totally disenfranchised and even engaging and getting at a woman that's probably right at your level. Like you guys technically probably should be together, but because of the secular frame of the social media and everything, these girls totally overvalue themselves. So
yeah, we were already talking about this earlier, the Neil Strauss's book on how to, and I think that there was a lot of nerdy dudes at that time. I'm trying to remember what, when did he write this? This came out in, I think, the 2000s, right? And this came out around the time of like, Mystery, and when Mystery had that TV show on E or whatever. I still don't see a date. So anyway, I think it was the 2000s, right? So we already went through the. For those in the chat, maybe who just jumped in, like it was 2005 is when this came.
That's what I was going to say. I think it was 05, 06, but
yeah. So and we already went through all of the positives of learning social dynamics, right? There's a lot of nerdy dudes who don't know anything about social dynamics, never walked up and talked to a girl, never had a conversation, and actually the internet. And everybody being atomized and living on the internet has made this even worse, to where in person people don't know how to have normal conversations.
And bro, even the priest at Montanica, like my speech at Montanica was on the manosphere and young men. And then I talked to Bishop Maxime, again, multiple priests there. And they're like, we get these young guys all the time that are just, and they say, well, what can we do? And I said, what would be good is if orthodoxy and just priests, because we have a patriarchy, if they just became more aware of the situation that young men are facing, and there's just a conversation, not that the church has to do anything. There doesn't need to be an initiative. There doesn't need to do. It's just that if the priest understood the sort of social context, that when a young kid comes into the church and he is feeling the brunt of everything we're talking about, the priest says, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I know exactly what's going on. And then he can teach him, because like you said, this awkwardness, the inability to talk to women, being totally backward, lack of self-awareness, the way they dress, the way they look. It's like a man has to teach you this. Your mother is going to tell you you're cute. No
Yeah,
matter
well, part
what.
of
A
this,
man
yeah,
has to give you reality.
part of this is a generation or two raised by single moms, and so they never had a dad in the household like exposing them to the realities of the world and like saying, "Look, dude, you look like a nerd, man. Come here."
Seriously.
I go,
And that's what we
why you
talked
walking
about.
like a stick up your butt? You look weird, dude. That's disgusting. Come here. Let's fix you, right? That's the thing is like the today's society thinks of that as shaming, and no, it's shaming for the purpose of you bettering yourself. You see,
Right.
there's a level to
That's
which
what
shaming is necessary.
exactly. That's why bullying and hazing, again, I'm too not to the extreme, but
You
in a
can go
little bit,
crazy
it's a
with it,
good
yeah.
thing. Because we men, if you've played sports, if you've done anything, we naturally sort ourselves out on a hierarchy of competency. And we know that. You go play sports, you're going to know who's the biggest and baddest dude pretty quickly. And if not, there's going to be violence to sort of sort that out and establish it. And so we bring reality to children. And so these young boys who grow up with single mothers, who have no male role models, they are so lost. I do one-on-ones with them. They're really, really lost. And that's what I was telling the priest. I was like, you just have to understand what these young men are going through. Many of them have no male role models. And you as a priest, you don't need to do anything. You just have to be aware so that you can fill that role. And they can belong to a patriarchy. They can belong to an institution. They can belong to a community and then begin to find themselves.
Well, one thing I realized as I got older, which I didn't understand when I was younger, but I understood as I got older, is that guys, men, dads, they have this added, they're problem solvers.
Right.
We're problem solvers naturally. So when we see a situation, we see a nerdy dude over there in the corner standing away and he won't talk to the girls because he's scared or whatever. Like we assess that and we see the problem right away and we think, okay, how are we going to solve this guy's problems? He needs to know, like, dude, you're a dork.
Right.
You need to hear that. It may hurt a little bit, but there's never going to be advancement until there's getting over that pain, that hurt, like you talked about with lifting weights, right? Same analogy, right? You're going to have to go through some of this pain. And by the way, it's not just physical. There's psychological and emotional weakness too that people need to get over, right? So a lot of people think, oh, you're mean when you debate, but you're so mean. No, I'm not mean. I'm actually just telling you how it is and how it needs to be, because that's how guys are. Guys are problem solvers. It doesn't come from a place of being mean. It's that so many people are so soy, they can't take a joke or they can't take somebody saying, oh, you're wrong, without they're losing their mind. Their world collapses.
Right. And then they want to complain about somebody else being in their fifis. No, bro, you're in your feelings. You're emotional. Like, that's the problem. Like, maybe you should have got punched in the face and gotten a few fights when you're younger. Maybe you'd be a little bit tougher. These young guys have no toughness.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, I got my ass beat like at least 2 or 3 times, right? When I was in high school. Now, one of those was legitimately I lost the fight. Another guy like sucker punched me, so I don't really count that one. But I still got beat up, right? So I got multiple times beat up in high school. I won a couple fights too, so it wasn't like all losses. But but I wasn't some big brawler. It's just weird to me that like that experience to me, which was, a handful of fights in high school, not that big of a deal. Like I think a lot of dudes have never been in a fight.
I agree with you. I know for a fact. I talked to him. I was like, bro, you ever been in a fight? No, I've never punched anything. Never hit it a heavy bag. Never, it's like, bro, like, no wonder you're lost, man.
Wow.
Like you have no toughness. Like, and so that's something that men give to other men. And that's where I think the church, orthodoxy, just being the last vestige of the patriarchy, if just priests, it just became common knowledge that, hey, these young men coming in, we're going to have to be more than their spiritual father, a male role model for them because they have none. That's
huge. What it needs to be. Unfortunately,
that would be huge.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, a sizable section of so-called orthodoxy is just as soy and just as pitiful as everything else. But go ahead.
Yeah.
Let's get to the super. Go ahead.
The priests at Montanico weren't, but that kind of wraps it up. My ending point is that men need a patriarchy to belong to, because that's how we learn what it means to be a man. And that's why orthodoxy is really the last home for a man to be a man, and for a man to have a religion, and for a man to have a value. So you want to blow out feminists. Well, bro, like if you're just some atomized young guy online and you're like debunking feminist logic and all this different stuff, but then you don't belong to anything masculine, no patriarchy, no tradition, no value system, like, bro, you've already lost. Like you can blow out the feminists, or you can, critique modern women and OnlyFans, and you can still be a traditional man with values and religion and with tradition and with the patriarchy and with the community. And so my last point was that boundaries are the new frontier. This is something that Father Russell and Montanica was talking about, is that, men have always looked for the frontier. That's what the battle was, the battlefront, exploring America. If you guys driven across America, like, it's amazing to think that ancestors, especially if you're a Native American or native of America, like, they went all the way to the Pacific Ocean before cars, bro. Like, they went across the Rocky Mountains, like the desire for the frontier. And you look at the men today, it's like, what the hell? You guys couldn't have done any of that. And so the new frontier, if you really want to find the leading edge of the masculine battle, it's the boundaries. It's the virtue, it's the honor, it's the glory, it's all the truth. Defending objective truth is like a radical thing right now. I mean, it's just finding these boundaries and defending them, not taking one step back. And that's where the church gives you a perimeter. Like, you were looking for a fight, the church gives you a perimeter that we as men can put our heels on it and face out against the world and take no step back. We don't compromise our values. We don't allow feminism. We don't allow degeneracy. None of this stuff's allowed to enter. And that's on us. And that gives us a purpose, and that gives us a front line to fight against. And that's kind of sums up what I wanted to say.
Speaking of that, there's going to be a big Trad Cap barbecue in Atlanta that I'm going to be going to, hopefully this summer. And I'm not joking, brother. We're all going to be boxing. So I applaud the Trad. I'm probably going to get my ass beat. I don't care. I'm going to go box a bunch of Trad Cats. And I'm going to get a few.
I imagine you'll get a few.
I'm going to get a few licks in. Even if I get my ass beat, I don't care. I'm going to get a few licks in on the Trad Cats. It's my buddies, though. I have friends that are Trad Cats who are like, dude, you got to come this year. We want you to come box. We have a gigantic barbecue. 150 people are coming. I'm like, yeah, I'm there. I'm gonna box all 150 y'all Trad Cats. Not really, but I'm gonna box some. But let's get to the super chats. I'm not joking, by the way. I really am gonna do that. People are going, oh, we gotta film it. We gotta film it. We're gonna beat guys' ass. We need to do
a celebrity ortho versus Catholic boxing match.
Dude, I want to fight somebody in the creator clash. I really do. Like, I
would love to.
I don't even care if I get beat up. I want to do it. Like, it doesn't matter to me. To me, it just sounds fun. It sounds like a blast, right?
It sounds like a blast.
But it's got to be somebody in my weight category.
Oh, for sure.
So somebody who's like, you gonna fight a bar? I don't think a bar is in my weight category. I don't know if a bar is in anybody's weight category. But I mean, if we could find somebody, I don't know if we could dig up Butterbean and see if he's able to fight
Butterball.
Butterbean. Oh, yeah, if he could fight a bar. But and by the way, I'm not some kind of badass fighter, dude. I'm probably going to get my ass beat, but it just sounds fun to me. I don't care. That's how guys are. Guys are like, yeah, I'll go get beat up. I don't care.
But the fact, you see, that's like a masculine spirit, though. Even whether you win or not, just to go to the fight, you're willing to go to the fight. Like, that's, dude. You talk to most of these young men, they run away from a fight, and I don't mean just a physical fight. I mean the state of the world. I mean, I equated this with people like, oh my gosh, look at the US, I'm fleeing, I'm going, name a country. It's like, bro, where are you going? Like, as Father Josiah Trenimoy says, we're Orthodox. We don't run. If the devil's here and he's destroying, then we stand. That's the point.
Yeah, I was talking to Tim Gordon, and we were talking about boxing. I feel like Tim will probably would beat my ass. But he
looks like a pretty athletic.
He's a pretty buff dude. He probably would beat my ass, but I would still box him. I don't care. All right, let's go to the super chats, guys. Circle G $3. Does anybody remember the OG men's rights channels from 2012? I remember all those. I read. You talking about channel, or you talking about articles? There was a girl who writes what she was doing with men's rights videos 10 years ago. So I'm not sure what that is, but I did follow and read all that stuff even back then. Damascene, $30. Jay, that was a great 5-hour debate stream. Can you share your story though about the first time you went to a liturgy and you felt the theological difference from Roman Catholicism? Did you experience the English liturgy hitting you differently? Thank you. Yes, and that was mainly because, number one, I'd never been to an Orthodox liturgy. And that was like 2006 or 7. And I went to an Antiochian liturgy. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the famous Antiochian church in Franklin, Tennessee. That was my first exposure to it. And it was in English. And it was before they had built that big giant temple that they have now. It was in a smaller parish back then in 2006 or 7. Still really, really beautiful. But I was coming from years of the Latin Mass. Okay, so it's just a totally different feel. And it absolutely hit me different. And I basically just said there was a warmth there that was not there in the SSPX Latin Mass that I went to for many years. Adam 1912, $50.
Oh, was that the church that we went to a wedding at?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
But see, that the church
that was the new building.
That's the new building, yeah, which is awesome. But yeah, the older parish was it was a lot smaller back in the day, and the parish was like really intimate, and maybe 100 people max. Anyway.
Wow. Yeah, it's huge now.
Yeah, it's huge. It's grown so much, and we have a lot of friends that go to that parish. It's a great. I'm not dissing it or anything like that. We go to the Rocorp parish, but when we're in Nashville. But anyway, Adam 1912. By the way, guys, if you would, we're gonna do super chats. If you want to send in your super chats, now is the time to do it for either myself or David. Adam 1912, $50. Will you do a RuPaul debate? I appreciate you guys. Work, turn to the left. Work, turn to the right. Cover girl, give us a twirl. No, I'm not going to be debating RuPaul because I would lose. So I would never, ever step into the ring to debate RuPaul. Noah Keiss, $3. I apologize this is redundant, but what do priests like Father Damick why do they so frequently denounce you? A friend of mine told me that he attended catechesis in Virginia, and the priest said the same thing. Is it all because of NGOs, or is there legitimate contention? So I did a video maybe 5 years ago, addressing the whole reason why he, out of nowhere, decided to come after me. It's a silly story. It had to do with just stuff he tweeted about, quote, incels and everybody that followed my audience being an incel. He had to do a public apology, by the way, for calling a bunch of young men incels, which is funny to me. But it had to do with me criticizing Ancient Faith Radio back in the day, and he took umbrage with that and wanted to defend Ancient Faith Radio, which was promoting all kinds of liberal stuff. He then tried to come out and do damage control and say, no, it's not actually liberal. I'm going to get rid of the liberal stuff. Okay, well then why was I bad for talking about it? So, go watch the video that I did. It's on my channel still. It's had almost 30,000 views. TB1892. Thank you, guys. I'll be baptized in Rocorp very soon. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. TJ, $3. I want you to do Esoteric Hollywood 3. The first 2 are some of my favorite books. I'm working on Esoteric Hollywood 3. So,
oh man, dude, you're a workaholic, man. I totally respect your work ethic.
Thank you. Yeah, we do work really hard over here. Grew up non-denominational, says Glitchy Rhythm for $5. The Orthodox Church makes more sense than what I grew up with. Yeah, I think it doesn't make a lot more sense than non-denominational stuff. Absolutely. How do I get over... I get overwhelmed by church history and how convoluted it can be. Do you have any book recommendations to highlight the basics? Yeah, I mean, Michael Welton's book, Two Paths, is a great introduction to church history. Father Meyendorff has a good book called The Orthodox Church, which is a good introduction to church history. The Damascene, $5. Do you have a favorite hymn? I mean, the Orthodox Church has a ton of liturgical chants, and I like a lot of those chants. I like a lot of the chants that we do, for example, during Easter. I don't have a particular favorite hymn, though. Do you?
No, not any particular one. I like the cherubic hymn. That's one, but nothing really. I don't know. I just enjoy the entirety of the liturgy.
Gary, $100. I'm a big fan of you both. Thank you for helping me into orthodoxy. Thank you so much, Gary. It looks like you've won this. Gary's won the super chat competition tonight. PBF Live, $40. This is a great stream, homies. Thank you so much, PBF. Palantir, $1. COTEL makes a great point about men having something that they're willing to die for. What does the average secular man have to die for without any family in the West? Propositional notions of the Constitution and civil rights. In other words, hypothetical. The question is like not being serious. No wonder everybody's nihilistic. Yeah, exactly. What's the point? If everything's nihilistic, then why does your pleasure even matter? Rachel Wilson, $5. Thank you so much for the stream. Happy to see both covering it. We need smart, strong Christian men influencing this sphere. Yes, I'm sure that David and I both will be dipping our
Yep.
toes into this sphere as best we can. Queen, $10. Hi, Jay and Cotel. No Hyman, no diamond. Hanzo, $5. Apologies, Jay. I will watch the first hour. Yeah, you don't have to apologize. It's all good. There's a lot of people click in at different times, but we did, and I did a stream a couple nights ago about Red Pill, where I talked about the areas where I agree and areas I disagree. Storm the Cat, $3. Can you do a Jay Dyer impression? Yes, I've done it the entire stream. Dave, Fight the Third, $50. What are your thoughts on dating versus courtship? This is a great question. I would say that if we existed in a more traditional, healthy society, courtship would be better. And it's definitely possible for Orthodox circles, and even outside of Orthodox circles. I know Calvinists and traditional Catholics do set up successful courtship situations. But even those, a lot of times it's really difficult for those to be successful, not because courtship itself is bad, but so much of the modern world is totally opposite and contrary to that. That it's just very difficult to run parallel societies in this society. It's not impossible. It's just really difficult. So I think that it's really hard to avoid dating in today's world. Most people are going to go that route, and it's just kind of that's just the reality of where we are. And I've also seen the problem of, over the years, certain really hardcore traditional circles, whether Protestant, Roman Catholic, and maybe even Orthodox, they'll try to have really strict, extreme views of courtship. And the moment somebody fails to match up to that, or they make a mistake, or they fornicate or whatever, oh, it's the end of the world, and everybody collapses, and it's just it's this huge scandal, and then people lose their faith, and it's like it's really extreme expectations for where society has gone. So it's really hard, I think, and I think Rollo has actually a good point about this, which is that a lot of these trad e-girls that suddenly are trad e-girls, right? Yep. And they're on the internet as the trad e-girl. Like, this is all just performative, right? They're not really trads, okay? And so they will promote this idea of all of this, like we're living in the 1800s. They're over here on freaking Twitter acting like it's freaking, they're going down to the saloon, you know? And I mean, it's not, we don't live in the 1800s. You're not going to be able to make everybody live like it's 1800s.
Yeah, the grift of the e-girl trad thing is pretty fierce, especially on TikTok. In regards to dating and courting, I would agree with what you said. We just don't live in a society where traditional courting can exist in that context. The way that I went about it, trying to find a traditional, pious Christian girl that is worthy of marriage and is on the same page that I'm on, is to be 100% straight up front and straightforward. Is that what I've noticed is I talked to some of these guys, and they're real reluctant to say what they really want because they're afraid it'll push her away or do X, Y, Z. And you're going to have to get over that. If you want a traditional girl, on the first time you guys talk, there should be at least be brought up of like what your expectation or what you're looking for. And so I would recommend every man to be very straightforward with what you're looking for and what you want, and be willing to say no. That's what these girls don't hear. They don't hear men say no. If you're one of the few guys that you're like, oh, you're into that? Okay, I'm not really interested. It was nice talking to you. See ya. They're going to actually be more curious about you. And so be willing to say no, move on, and be 100 up front, because we just don't live in a society where you can, have families vet each other and court and do all this stuff. It's just, we don't live in a world like that.
Hoodrat 29, $1. Why do Protestants say the law is done away with? Why do they direct this towards the church? Does the church believe Levitical law is done away with, or the Mosaic 10 laws? Well, how we interpret the law being fulfilled is going to kind of differ depending upon what tradition you're coming from. So a lot of Protestants will sort of classify anything like liturgy or vestments as part of the law being done away with. And so it's kind of an easy way for them to just sort of hand wave liturgical worship and this kind of stuff. Orthodox Church has a totally different paradigm for how they look at what elements carried over into the worship of the church. So that's a really kind of a long, involved question. And I have a lot of live streams, and my friend Lewis did a really good documentary on Orthodox worship and its continuity with the Old Testament and its services. So go watch that documentary that he made over at Orthodox Shahada. Palantir, $1. How can Orthodox guys that are serious about their faith engage in fasting and get gains from weightlifting. Well, did you know that weightlifting is actually an orthodox thing? That
Yeah.
I mean, people don't know this, but
I,
so that's a question for you. You're a much more dedicated, obviously,
well,
lifter.
multiple priests. I've had priests come on that are. I had a priest who's a bodybuilder, like
Uh,
literally
I
competing
know
bodybuilder.
Father Moses in Texas is like a huge, gigantic buff bodybuilder guy.
Father Russell at the Holy Trinity Serbian Church, and they're in Butte, Montana. Lifts all the time. What he does is he tries to use protein powder during the Lenten fast. So it's all about macros. So when you're in a high intense fast like the Lenten fast, meet your macros. Try to get your proteins where they need to be and your carbohydrates, and do the best you can. If you're constantly working out, your body's going to show it. So what I've noticed is a lot of people want to use things for excuses. You just got to go be consistent. Consistency always wins, and just get your macros in. That's what, again, I have priest on. That's what they always say. Well, just do the best you can. And if you are in a place where you need something, talk to your priest about it. That's the point. Talk with your priest.
Yeah, it's not fasting is not all just food. People think fasting is purely and solely something to do with diet. No, that's only part of it. In fact, fasting also has to do with almsgiving. Hunter, $5. I'm excited that you're coming to LA. Just don't drink the water. I never drink tap water, and I would remind people too, if they do want to get tickets to our show in the show description. July 6th will be live in Los Angeles, Hollywood area. It's going to be a lot of fun. Amanda Hugginkiss, $1. How would a theoretical situation occur where the Orthodox monarchy is established anew? How is a monarch found or chosen? Well, just simply by the coronation of the church. So it doesn't have to be like going through genealogy books to find some descendant. It could be that. I mean, I think there are descendants of the Romanovs in Russia. So theoretically, Russia could have another monarch. But if you look at the Byzantine model, it was not solely on the basis of genetic lineage. So there's a lot of different ways that could occur, but the authority comes from the coronation of the church. So there's different possibilities for how that could be. But of course, Orthodoxy, we're not mainly concerned with that's like a trad cat mindset of like, our concern is to how to fix the politics and get a beige trad political leader. That's like secondary to what we're focused on. Our focus is the theology that we think leads to then down the road other political solutions like monarchy, and it should be a patriarchy and monarchy go together. I believe, and I don't think that a female monarch is ideal. By the way. All right, so that I think is tonight's show. Thank you guys so much. A lot of great comments and insights. I have David's channel, Church Eternal Logos, is linked in the show description, and look for more work from him and more debates.
Thanks for having me on, brother.
Yeah, absolutely great. It was a great chat. Palantir, we got another super chat. Palantir says during Great Lent, isn't the goal minimal caloric intake? I'm not trolling. It's a actual question that we are supposed to emaciate. So he's arguing, is the purpose of Lent to emaciate yourself? I don't know if that's the purpose of Lent.
What? I don't think so. I've never heard that.
All right. Thank you guys. Everybody have a good night, and I'll talk to you guys later.
God bless.